Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this video lesson about European exploration. This is part one of 2 video lessons, and I'm Miss Jennifer Blank. I will be your guide on this journey. All right, so here's our key idea slide. We're not going to talk about all of these in this video lesson. The first half we're going to talk about right now, and the second half we're going to talk about in part 2. So today we're going to talk about causes, important empires and nations, technology, and key European nations. So hold on to your hats, and here we go. All right, so causes. The Renaissance. The Renaissance is a very important cause of the Age of Exploration because it set the stage for the curiosity of people to be spurred, right? Because prior to the Renaissance, the medieval church controlled everything. You couldn't do a thing without the church's permission. So after the Renaissance, when people start to question the power, authority, and omnipotence of the church, people start thinking outside the box a little bit, and they're looking for other options. The printing press was also very important. This allowed information and knowledge to be disseminated faster and cheaper, so it made it more accessible. The modern nation state, or sometimes called the new monarchies, that was also very important cause. This allowed for the centralization of power and the consolidation of resources. So this helped make exploration possible. Also, the Protestant Reformation further fractured the power of the church and also strengthened the position of new monarchies, allowing them to use religion to consolidate their own power as opposed to the church consolidating its power. We also had massive improvements in technology. So these are all very important factors that allowed the Age of Exploration to happen. All right, so important empires and nations. These are just big picture. You should be aware of these things at various points throughout the rest of our content, throughout the rest of European history. They're going to pop up and be important. So I just want you to have a basic sense of what they are. So the Ottoman Empire versus the Persian Empire. These are two rival empires in the Middle East. They competed for trade routes and access to the European markets. Now, the Ottomans won this rivalry, so they now had the monopoly over trade routes in the region. This made Europeans nervous because now, instead of dealing with 2 people and being able to play one off the other, they were only dealing with one. It's much harder to negotiate with a monopoly than with multiple parties. Now, there are 2 places in Italy we need to pay attention to, Genoa and Venice. Okay, so in Genoa, in the 15th century, their trade focused on finance. So they financed expeditions for a lot of different explorers and some entire nations, and they had a large role in the slave trade. Venice also had a large role in the slave trade, but their trade was primarily focused on luxury goods as opposed to finance, right? So they also dealt in firearms, slaves, and precious metals. Both these areas of Italy had a large influence in the slave trade, and that's going to be important later when we talk about that. All right, so technology. Without these things, exploration is not possible. All right, so we have shipbuilding, we have weaponry, we have navigational instruments, and maps, or otherwise known as cartography, the art of map making. Please know that word. It's very important. So shipbuilding, listen, without ships that are going to get across the ocean, that are going to be able to handle that trip, you're not going anywhere, right? So the caravel, which is above here, that little invention made sea travel possible. It was large, it was sturdy, and it was able to navigate the seas. Now the sternpost rudder, which made turning and navigation easier, controlling the ship much easier, and the lateen sail, which made the sails more efficient. They were much more efficient in catching the wind and allowing the ship to go faster. Now when you get to the New World, presumably there's going to be people there, so you have to find a way to deal with them so that you can conquer it for yourself if you're thinking like a conqueror at this point. So gunpowder is going to be very effective in that endeavor. Navigational instruments are essential. So we have the compass. We should all know what that is. Now the astrolabe is very important, and that's pictured above right there. That allowed sailors to find their latitude. Okay, so that's very key in being able to get where you want to go as efficiently and quickly as possible. Maps, of course, the more accurate they are and the more often they are produced, the better chance one has of making it to their desired destinations. These are all very important things that helped spur the Age of Exploration on, but also helped further it once it started. So some things were invented before the Age of Exploration, which allowed it to happen in the first place. But many of these things were tweaked all the way through and just made better, and this allowed exploration to flourish. All right, so some key European nations. 16th century was known as the Spanish century. They dominated. In the 1500s, it was all about Portugal. But I'll get to the Portuguese in a minute. So the 16th century was the Spanish century. These people known as conquistadors or Spanish conquerors were charged with conquering the New World in the name of Spain. Now, their motto was God, glory, and gold, but that was not really true. That was just on paper, right? In actuality, all they focused on, or for the most part, was gold, glory, and just a touch of God to keep up appearances. Okay, they were focused on wealth and power, and because of this, they engaged in a lot of activities that the Spanish crown did not like. So, in order to control these guys, the Spanish developed the encomienda system, which basically, in exchange for the loyalty and discipline of the conquistadors, they received land and titles in both Spain and the New World. So this managed to keep them under control because they were just running about killing everybody willy-nilly. It wasn't good times. Now, the Treaty of Tordesillas was also very important. This happened in 1494. It divided the New World in half vertically. Okay, so this allowed Spain and Portuguese, the Spanish and the Portuguese, just focus on their own thing and not have to worry about fighting each other. This is why Brazil speaks Portuguese and not Spanish, because where the treaty line fell, Brazil was to the right of it. Everything to the right was Portuguese. Everything to the left was Spanish. Okay. All right, Hernan Cortez, if you're looking for a poster boy for the conquistadors, look no further. He's your guy, okay? He was not very nice. He was Spanish, he was Catholic, he was greedy, and he was ambitious. He took out the Aztec leader. Now, the fact that the Aztecs conquered the surrounding peoples prior to the Spanish arrival made Spanish conquest much, much easier and more efficient. Instead of taking on 20 different tribes or however many there were, they only had to take on one. So that made things a lot easier for the Europeans. But towards the end of the 16th century, Spain was to go... Okay, silver and inflation, massive problems. Inflation is basically the diluting of the currency. The money doesn't buy as much. The money isn't worth as much. So because of all of their shenanigans, it destroyed their economy. So by the end of the 16th century, Spain is having serious issues. Now, enter England. Now, Spain is Catholic. Okay, but England is Protestant, and even though these people their driving forces are wealth and power, there's still religion in the mix here, right? They still want to advance their own faith. So the English want to go after the papists, and the Spanish want to go after the heretics, right? And they want to use the New World and this exploration as a pretext for spreading their own faiths. So this is going to continue to be a theme throughout the rest of European history. So keep this in mind: Spain, or Catholic versus Protestant, important. Okay, let's talk about Portugal. Like I said before, Portugal, 15th century or 1400s, that was their time. Now, they had a few primary objectives for exploration. They wanted military glory, they wanted to convert Muslims, and they wanted to find gold, slaves, and overseas trade routes. Okay, so they needed all this stuff. Now, Lisbon, Portugal, well, Portugal itself, but particularly Lisbon, was very well situated for trade. Okay, it's right in the Mediterranean. We're talking about warm water ports. It's good times. All right. Now, remember, later on, we're going to talk about Russia. When you think Russia, think warm water ports. But that's later. All right, so Lisbon effectively served as the entrance for Asian goods into Europe. This made it a very, very wealthy spot. Okay, they controlled African gold, and they also got Brazil via the Treaty of Tordesillas. So they even had a foot in the New World as well. Now, one of my favorites, I gotta, be upfront. Full disclosure, I love England. I'm obsessed with England. England is good times. Now, just to give you some background on English colonization, they might have been able to jump on this colonization bandwagon earlier, but England was a hot mess. Henry VII, who's in the early 1500s, he won the War of the Roses in England and was the primary dynasty taking power, and he was great. Henry VII was awesome, okay? I mean, he might not have been a nice guy, but he was a very good monarch. He stabilized the country. He rebased the currency. He left England. By the time he died and his son Henry VIII took over, England was in a very, very good spot. Okay, it was very stable in terms of other countries. Now, Henry VIII, however, not so much. He spent money like it was water, okay, on a lot of fruitless and useless wars, and also on his own, like private parties, and he was just having just a good time all around. Wasn't as concerned with governing. So by the time he left and he died and left the monarchy, England was a mess. Not to mention the fact that he separated from the Roman Church in order to grant his own divorce. So he caused monetary problems, he caused military problems, and he caused religious problems. So Henry VIII, all in all, whoa, like it was a mess. So his son, who was only 8 at the time, became king, Edward VI, right? Now, because Edward was a boy, he was only like 8, 9 years old when he took the throne. Uh, they had to have what's called a regency government. So Henry, before his death, handpicked these 2 dukes, all right, to rule in his son's name until Edward was old enough to take over the governing responsibilities himself. Now, Henry did split from the Church of Rome to get his divorce, but he didn't change any doctrine. He just made himself the head of the church. A lot of other things were largely the same, right? I mean, he took over the monasteries, and because he needed money, so he was taking whatever the church property was there, he took all their stuff so that he could get some cash out of the deal. But doctrine, it's pretty much the same, except he's the head of the church. Now, under Edward, these 2 dukes were like massively Protestant, like epically Protestant. So Catholics start getting persecuted. They turn the country, whoa, Protestant. So if you're like over here Catholic, like it's like, whoa, it's like off the screen Protestant, okay? Now, Edward dies because he's a sickly lad. He had hemophilia, and he died of tuberculosis at 16. So now Henry's daughter, who's Catholic, she was the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, who was Spanish. So this woman is very Catholic. She's crazy. She's a cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, Mary Tudor. They called her Bloody Mary for short. Why? Because she killed a bunch of people who didn't want to convert to Catholicism. There were about 300,000 people that fled England in order to not be executed, to not be burned at the stake. So she didn't rule too long. She only ruled about 5 years. And then after all of this mess of a nightmare comes Elizabeth, my favorite dead monarch, because she's awesome. As a woman, it's going to be hard to govern effectively anyway because of the patriarchal systems that are in place, but certainly after her family, I mean, that was a train wreck. So Elizabeth comes in, she rebases the currency, she keeps England out of military quagmires, and she creates a religious compromise that settles everybody down. And at this point in 1585, we start to be able to attempt colonization. This brings us to Roanoke, okay? So there were actually 2 Roanokes, 1585, 1587, but they tried to settle. It didn't work out. But the fact that Elizabeth set the stage for England to have the resources and the stability to even attempt it is very, very important. So they tried Roanoke. It didn't work out. Flash forward a few years, in 1607, we start the process of Jamestown. And by 1610, Jamestown is a permanent settlement. Now, the English came to the New World for different reasons. Jamestown was primarily for profit, and the New England colonies were done for religious freedom. But it's important to note, not for everybody, just for themselves. Like, this was not like, oh, freedom for, no. They wanted the freedom to practice their own methods, but freedom for other beliefs was not allowed. Now, they did eventually consolidate their American holdings and even the holdings of the Dutch, the Netherlands, that we're going to talk about in a minute. All right, the Netherlands, speaking of the devil. So they focused on winning their freedom from Spain, and they were able to accomplish this by 1648. After this, they're like, all right, what do we want? We want money and control of trade routes. So they established very successful trading centers in both Africa and in the New World. But England was a military powerhouse, and they were bringing that military power to the New World. They basically threatened the Netherlands with military takeover, or we'll buy it from you. So the Netherlands were like, well, all right, we'll take the check. So that was pretty peaceful, all told. But nonetheless, they were still quite successful and made a lot of money. France. Now, France is going to have issues. So they start out okay, but then they start having some serious problems. You're going to see this throughout European history. If there's a problem, France is probably connected somehow. Listen, no disrespect to the French, but real talk. Like, it's there. Like, it's history. What am I going to do, you know? So they settled mainly in Canada. They were big on the fur trade, and they were smart in forging alliances with local tribes. They did have fantastic explorers who were really pushing the envelope. They explored areas of Canada, of the United States, even all the way to the Caribbean islands. But they were really lousy bureaucrats. They could not manage or organize stuff to save their life. Okay, so they imposed direct rule over the colonies, and they were just very terribly ineffective rulers, and this was going to create problems later on, and it's going to result in them losing their colonial territories. But that comes later. That's the end of part 1. I hope you learned what you needed to, and I will see you in part 2.